Hi, I'm Sidney Kean, and I shall be reading Pinocchio by Carlo Colodi, Chapter 1. One fine day, a piece of wood was lying in the shop of an old carpenter of the name of Master Antonio. He was called by everybody Master Cherry on account of the end of his nose, which was always as red and polished as a ripe cherry. No sooner had Master Cherry set eyes on the piece of wood than his face beamed with delight, and rubbing his hands together with satisfaction, he said softly to himself, "This wood has come at the right moment. It will just do to make the leg of a little table." He immediately took a sharp axe, and just as he was going to give that first stroke, he remained with his arms suspended in the air, for he had heard a very small voice saying imploringly, "Do not strike me hard." Picture to yourselves the astonishment of good old Master Cherry. He turned his terrified eyes all round the room to try and discover where the little voice could possibly have come from, but he saw nobody. He looked under the bench. Nobody. He looked into a basket of shavings and sawdust. Nobody. He even opened the door of the shop and gave a glance into the street, and still nobody. Who then could it be? "I see how it is," he said, laughing and scratching his wig. "Evidently that little voice was all my imagination. Let us set to work again." And taking up his axe, he struck a tremendous blow on the piece of wood. "Oh, oh, oh, you have hurt me!" cried the same little voice dolefully. This time Master Cherry was petrified. As soon as he had recovered the use of his speech, he began to say, stuttering and trembling with fear, But where on earth can that little voice have come from that said, oh, 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 oh? Is it possible that this piece of wood can have learned to cry and to lament like a child? I cannot believe it. If anyone is hidden inside, so much the worse for him. I will settle him at once." So saying, he seized the poor piece of wood and commenced beating it without mercy. Then he stopped to listen if he could hear any little voice lamenting. He waited 2 minutes. Nothing. 5 minutes. Nothing. 10 minutes. Still nothing. "I see how it is," he then said, forcing himself to laugh and pushing up his wig. "Evidently the little voice that said, oh, oh, was all in my imagination. Let us set to work again." But as all the same he was in a great fright, he tried to sing to give himself a little courage. Putting the axe aside, he took his plane to plane and polish the bit of wood. But whilst he was running it up and down, he heard the same little voice say, laughing, "Oh, have done. You are tickling me all over." "Oh, no, stop, please stop." This time, poor Master Cherry fell down as if he had been struck by lightning. When he at last opened his eyes, he found himself seated on the floor. At that moment, someone knocked at the door. "Come in," said the carpenter. A lively little old man immediately walked into the shop. His name was Geppetto. But when the boys of the neighbourhood wished to put him in a passion, they called him by the nickname of Puddinghead, because his yellow wig greatly resembled a pudding made of Indian corn. Geppetto was very fiery. Woe to him who called him Puddinghead. He became furious, and there was no holding him. "Good day, Master Antonio," said Geppetto. "What are you doing there on the floor?" "I'm teaching the alphabet to the ants." "Much good may that do to you." "What has brought you to the neighborhood, Geppetto?" "My legs." "I am come to ask a favor of you." "Here, I'm ready to serve," replied the carpenter, getting up onto his knees. "This morning, an idea came into my head. I thought I would make a beautiful wooden puppet, a wonderful puppet that should know how to dance, to fence, and to leap like an actor. With this puppet, I would travel about the world to earn a piece of bread and a glass of wine. What do you think of it?" "Bravo, Puddinghead!" exclaimed the same little voice, and it was impossible to say where it came from. Hearing himself called Puddinghead, Geppetto became as red as a turkey cock from rage, and turning to the carpenter, he said in a fury, "Why do you insult me?" "Who insults you?" "You called me Puddinghead." It was not I. Would you have it then that it was I? It was you. I say, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And becoming more and more angry, from words they came to blows, and flying at each other they bit and fought and scratched manfully. When the fight was over, Master Antonio was in possession of Geppetto's yellow wig, and Geppetto discovered that the grey wig belonging to the carpenter had remained between his teeth. "Give me back my wit," screamed Master Antonio, "and you return me mine, and let us make friends." The two old men, having each recovered his own wig, shook hands and swore that they would remain friends to the end of their lives. "Well then, neighbor Geppetto," said the carpenter, to prove that peace was made, "what is the favor that you wish of me?" "I want a little piece of wood to make my puppet. Will you give me some?" Master Antonio was delighted, and he immediately went to the bench and fetched the piece of wood that had caused him so much fear. But just as he was going to give it to his friend, the piece of wood gave a shake and, wriggling violently out of his hands, struck with all its force against the dried-up shins of poor Geppetto. "Ah, is that the courteous way in which you make your presents, Master Antonio? You have almost lamed me." "I swear to you that it was not I." "Then you would have it that it was I?" "The wood is entirely to blame." "I know that it was the wood, but it was you that hit my legs with it." "I did not hit you with it." "Liar! Geppetto, don't insult me, or I will call you Puddinghead. Ass, Puddinghead, donkey, Puddinghead, baboon, Puddinghead." On hearing himself called Puddinghead for the third time, Geppetto, blind with rage, fell upon the carpenter, and they fought desperately. Their accounts being thus squared, they shook hands, swore to remain friends for the rest of their lives. Geppetto carried off his fine piece of wood, and thanking Master Antonio, returned to his house limping.